So in this video, we will be discussing about few more concepts related to EC2. So we'll discuss about the difference between private IP versus public IP, placement groups, elastic IPs, elastic network interfaces, and last we'll discuss about EC2 interface. So let us start by private IP versus public IP. So in AWS, private IPs and public IPs are used to define how an instance communicates within the AWS network and with the outside world, right? So private IP, what is private IP? So private IP is assigned to EC2 instance within a VPC. This is used for the private IP used for internet communication between within the same VPC or peered VPC. We'll discuss about like VPC in details in later videos. So VPCs are virtual private clouds basically, right? So private IPs are non-routable on the internet. So whatever IP you have in the private network, outside world doesn't know about that, and it is attached to the instance until it is stopped or terminated, right? So for example, private IP is attached to the EC2 instance, but if EC2 instance is stopped or terminated, it will like get detached. So the example of private IP is like 172.3.1.16.45. What are the use cases? Like sometimes we have app server talking to a backend database server in private subnet. So in this case, we use private IPs. Now, what are public IPs? So public IPs are mapped to the instance private IP via NAT, network address translation, used for communication over the internet, and it is assigned automatically, or it can also be assigned manually. Like there is a concept called elastic IP that provides some fixed IPs to the EC2 instances. Public IPs, when you restart the EC2 instance, public IP it can change. Example is like 3.109.221.105. And whenever we type something on the internet, like a web server access from the internet goes via public IPs. Now, if we do some comparison between private IP and public IP, if we talk about visibility, private IP is visible only inside a network, but whereas public IP is global. Private IP doesn't have like internet access, but public IP have internet access. The assignment of DHCP is like the assignment of private IP is done by VPC, DHCP, Dynamic Host Control Protocol. But whereas public IPs are auto-assigned or elastic IPs. Private IPs are persistent until you stop or terminate them. Private IP may change unless elastic IP is being used. Mainly private IP is used in backend internal traffic, whereas public IPs are used in web application, SSH calls, API calls from the outside. Now let us discuss about placement groups. What are placement groups? So placement group is a very important concept in AWS, and basically placement group influence how Amazon EC2 instances are physically placed on underlying hardware. So in order to improve performance, fault tolerance, depending on the type of placement group you choose. Mainly there are three types of placement groups: cluster, partition, and spread. So this cluster partition is places instances close together in a single availability zone to get low latency and high throughput between applications. Then second, we have partition. Partition is like spreads instances across logical partition on separate hardware. They are used to process large distributed systems like HDFS, etc. Then we have the third placement group called spread. Spread is like instances placed on a distinct hardware, different racks, in order to get high availability and small instance sets. In placement cluster placement groups, instances are grouped closely in one availability zones to provide lowest latency, highest network throughput, and it is recommended for HPC, high performance computing. So there is a limitation, like all instances in the cluster placement group must be in the same instance type and in the same availability zone. So always remember, like in cluster placement group, all instances must be in same instance type and in single availability zone. And in partition placement groups, like instances are divided into partitions, each on separate hardware. Failure on one partition doesn't affect others. It is ideal for big data systems like Hadoop and Cassandra. Each partition can hold many instances but is isolated from others physically. Then if we talk about spread placement group, each instance is placed on a separate underlying hardware to maximize fault tolerance. It is suitable for critical to small workloads, and you can get only maximum 7 instances per availability zone. Spread placement groups are mainly used when you want to avoid single point of failures. Always remember you cannot mix placement group types and use the same AZs availability zones when launching into clusters or spread groups. Not all instance types are supported in placement groups. We have to remember this thing, like not all instance types are supported in placement groups. Now let us discuss about elastic IPs. What are elastic IPs? An elastic IP is a static public IP version 4 address provided by AWS that you can associate with an EC2 instance or a network interface. Unlike standard public IPs, EIP elastic IP does not change when you stop or start the instance. So what is the reason to use elastic IP? So in order to maintain the fixed public IP when if instance restarts, it is useful for DNS entries, whitelisting in firewalls, and address site hosting. You can quickly remap the elastic IP address to another instance in case of instance failures. Suppose you are running a web server on EC2 instance, right, and have a domain name pointing to its IP. If the EC2 instance stops and restarts, a regular public IP will change, but with the elastic IP, your server keeps the same IP, so your DNS record does not break. But note that AWS charges for unused elastic IP. So if you have created elastic IPs and you are not using it, AWS will charge for it. Always use elastic IPs wisely. Instead of using elastic IPs, you can should use load balancer and Route 53 for scalable solutions. We'll discuss about load balancers and Route 53 in details in later videos. Now the next is elastic network interface. What is elastic network interface? So elastic network interface is a virtual network card that can be attached to an EC2 instance in a VPC, virtual private cloud, to allow the instance to connect to the network and can carry multiple IP addresses, security groups, and MAC address. What are the key components of this ENI, elastic network interface? Primary private IP address, one or more secondary private IP addresses, one elastic IP which is optional for public access, one or more security groups, MAC address, description, and tags. What are the reasons to use elastic network interface? So multiple ENIs per instance, right? It enables separation of traffic, move ENIs between instances to fast failover and disaster recovery. Attached to Lambda or ECS with ENI to enable VPC networking. For creating virtual applications, like ENIs act like virtual firewalls, routers, etc. So there are two types of ENIs, primary ENI and secondary ENI. Primary ENI comes attached to EC2 by default, whereas secondary ENI manually attached for extra traffic routing or high availability setup. You can detach an ENI from a failed instance and reattach it to an standby instance. This retains the IP address and the network configuration, providing minimum disruption. Now the last topic we'll discuss about what is EC2 Hibernate. So EC2 Hibernate is a feature that allows you to pause your EC2 instances and resume it later without losing in-memory data. It works similar to closing your laptop lid, your OS, right? Your OS processes and RAM are saved to the disk, and the instance can be restored exactly as it was. So whenever you just open the lid, all your processes are open and you can continue working on that. Whenever hibernation is triggered, is it manually or automatically, the contents of RAM are saved to the root EBS volume which is attached to the EC2 instance. The instance stops, and when restarted, memories, whatever was saved in the RAM, is reloaded, and OS continues as if nothing happened. So what are the benefits of EC2 Hibernate? Faster boot time, preserve app state, and it is cost effective as well. And what are the requirements for EC2 Hibernate? It supports instances like C5, M5, T3, R5, etc. And instances must use Amazon EBS for root volume. And it should have less than 150 GB RAM. Hibernation should be enabled at the launch of the instance, and it should be encrypted root volume. There are several use cases of EC2 Hibernate. For example, long-running data science experiments, infrequent dev test environment, pause resume application with large startup states. So yeah, so this is all we had in this video. Thank you.